All right, good evening, good evening. How is everyone doing this afternoon?
Great, great, great.
All right, I hope it's a little bit more resonant response to that. How is everyone this afternoon?
Great, great, great.
There we go, there we go. I hope we are excited to be in this space this evening to hear a robust and historic conversation. Not just historic in the nature of presenting and discussing history with history makers, but in making history tonight on the 40th anniversary of the birth of the environmental justice movement. Again, welcome to Recalling Warren County, a panel discussion on the birth of the environmental justice movement with some of the original organizers and protesters. My name is Professor Whittington. I serve as the Deputy Director of Advanced Carolina 501c4 and Deputy Director of Programs of the North Carolina Black Alliance, a proud partner for this evening's events and the rest of this week. As an appointed member of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Qualities, Environmental Justice, and Equity Advisory Board, I am absolutely excited to have been chosen to moderate this evening. As you can imagine, my inner nerd, science nerd, is really bursting at the seams. And so also I serve as a lecturer of environmental justice at NC State University and at Meredith College. And so I will be your moderator for this evening. As you all likely know, this event is a part of a larger series of programs happening here at Duke University and in North Carolina in celebration of the 40th anniversary of the environmental justice movement. This series is an opportunity for students, activists, scholars, educators, and community members to reflect on the past, present, and future of the movement, progress made, and liberation yet to be achieved. This event in particular focuses on the beginnings, the history of the movement taking us back to the protests in Afton, North Carolina of Warren County that launched the environmental justice movement as we know it today. Today, we all have the esteemed privilege of being in the presence of the originators of the movement and allies to discuss the Warren County protest. And so I hope that everyone has been able to read the extensive biographies of our esteemed panelists this evening, but for the brevity of time, I will have to unfortunately keep the introductions brief. The Honorable Eva Clayton, who served as the first African American to represent North Carolina in the House since 1898 Reconstruction. That's right. Additionally, she was the first black woman to serve in the U.S. Congress. Reverend Dr. Benjamin Chavis, coiner of the term environmental racism and considered father of the environmental justice movement and a civil rights icon today. The esteemed and Honorable Dollie Burwell, one of the lead organizers of the protest and considered the mother of the environmental justice movement. Leader and Elder Wayne Moseley, a Warren County native and one of the first people arrested during the protest and was actually arrested twice. So, that's right. That's right. Reverend Bill Kearney, organizer for the Warren County Environmental Action Team and associate minister of the historic Coley Springs Missionary Baptist Church and a native of Warren County. That's right. That's right. And leader Jenny Labalme, Duke alumni and a student journalist at the time and a photographer at the protest. And so we'll be able to see a little sneak preview of some of Ms. Labalme's work. So let's give it another round of applause. That's right. So before we get started, because I know you all came to hear the very powerful, engaging discussion, not just to hear the context by which I'm going to provide, but it's very important. I need you all to understand that as we read history books, we oftentimes see it in black and white. We have to understand that in this room tonight and in the virtual world, we thank you for also joining us in that space and for those who will view this recording 40 years from now. Understand that in this room, we made history with individuals that are not just captured in black and white iconic photos, but individuals who birthed the movement and didn't stop there. You are looking and listening and learning and yielding from the individuals who created policies, inroads, sat and was advisors to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., sat with Nelson Mandela and actually traveled in the midst of apartheid to bring a global movement. That is why the movement is global. It is not because it was just carried by the messengers. It is because it was carried by the originators by which messengers were birthed. So I really want us to ground in that global analysis of where environmental justice began. Wasn't an accident. It wasn't happenstance. It wasn't organizers who didn't understand how to organize. It was a community of individuals that you will hear are experts, folks who loved and prayed and marched, but also had intentionality to serve in elected offices at the highest levels, that served at the calling of faith ministry, that has served in some of our highest civil rights departments to today. So I need us to be grounded in that as we listen to this conversation, because I hope to see that we are not only just passengers, but we are writing down calls of action for what still needs to be done for the charge ahead for environmental injustices, to achieve the justice in environmental justice. So now, as we move with that context into the exciting portion of this evening's discussion. As most folks know or should know, like I've already covered, this being the 40th year anniversary of the Warren County PCB protest. All right, I want to ground that. And what the Washington Post called the greatest civil rights movement since the 1960s, the birthplace of the environmental justice movement. I would like this to be an open dialogue, keeping that in mind. An open dialogue, if you all want to converse as we're able to actually tune in, it's an honor for us. But I do want to keep in mind the time that we have. I wish we had all evening, y'all. I would pull up a chair, front porch conversation. But I will pose this question to the panel, beginning with Mother Burwell, followed by Congresswoman Clayton, Dr. Chavis, Leader Moseley, Leader Labalme, and then Reverend Kearney, in that order. We want you all to take us back to where it all began in Warren County, North Carolina. What was your pathway into this movement leading up to the 1982 protest? And if you would walk us through what you witnessed and experienced. Ms. Burwell.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you all for being here, and I'm excited to be here. And let me, for the sake of time, just jump right in. I would say that my pathway to the movement began many years before 1982. It began while attending segregated schools in North Carolina, Vance and Warren County, and having to endure blatant racism, having to suffer the racial injustice in every aspect of my education, from secondhand books that was hand-me-down from the white schools, oftentimes with pages missing and racial slurs in them, to having to attend classes in dilapidated school buildings, and from having to just see all the racism and injustice that was happening to black children, including myself. I decided early on that I had to fight racism by any means necessary. So once I became a young adult, I joined every civil rights organization that I could, including the Commission for Racial Justice and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and I began to learn how to organize. I began, as I said today, my parents taught me that charity begins at home. So I began to organize in my own community around registering people to vote, knocking on doors, to getting people out to vote. And so when the landfill was cited for Warren County, I decided that God had brought me to a point and equipped me with tools that I needed to stand up against the state. So for 6 weeks, we organized protests every day, went to jail 5 times. The last time my bond had got so high, I had to call a wealthy lady, Congresswoman Eva Clayton, to bond me out. But the moral of the story is my path began with injustice, and it followed with injustice and racism.
Yes. Congresswoman Clayton.
How I got to Warren County is because my husband was recruited by a white attorney in Warren County who wanted to start an integrated law firm, which represented the very first integrated law firm in the state of North Carolina. So it was a result of that invitation I happened to be in Warren County. And by the way, that lawyer was Moses' cousin, too, so it's in the family, what he did. At the time of the PCB announcement, I happened to be working for the governor who put the PCB in Warren County. I had signed up with him with the first term When I heard the announcement of the PCB, I thought it was time for me not to go to the second term, right? So my involvement was I came to Warren County. I was there. I was working with the government. Also, I got involved with the PCB as a result of understanding that God's creation shouldn't be abused. I come from it not only from a political standpoint, I come from it from a spiritual standpoint as well. Also, being involved with the PCB and having activists like Dollie Burwell, who was helpful, she's been helpful, I've been helpful to her, we've been connected for centuries now, my God. But as a result, the citizens got very involved political. In 1992, which is considered the birth of the environment, 82, excuse me, in 1982, which is considered the birth of the environment justice in Warren County, actually the first black sheriff was elected. The first time blacks were a majority at the county commissioners, and also we had a couple to be elected on the Board of Education. With this newfound political power, we still couldn't stop the coming of the PCB. But the engagement of mine was involving coming to that area. But I want to make this point, too. The result of what you saw happen in 1992 was a combination of people who were outraged. It was a combination of praying mothers and congregations and ministers. It was the result of irate citizens, white or black, coming together for the realization that we were all in the ship together. So that protest, the Warren consistent protest, drew others who had a sense of consciousness. That's how we got the United Church of Christ to get involved. That's how Reverend Chavis got involved. They brought a new sense of urgency. No longer was it a Warren County protest. It became the nation's protest. And he named it Environment Injustice, but it became a conscious reality that what we were doing was injustice. We call it environment injustice. Some call it civil rights, but we recognize it was bigger than Warren County. What we were doing in Warren County was symbolic of what was happening throughout. Warren County wasn't the first place where injustice would happen. It's just we had the drumbeat louder and stronger. And God bless there were some leaders who came outside and made it a national problem.
And that's a perfect segue to Dr. Chavis.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. First, I want to thank God for this opportunity to be back at home in my alma mater, Duke University. I thank God for these freedom fighters. When I was a little boy growing up in Oxford, North Carolina, I said, I want to be like Eva Clayton. And Molly and Dollie Burwell, she's considered the mother of the environmental justice movement. So if I'm the father, we have a lot of children.
Thank God.
What I'm trying to say is that what started in that black community of Alton, Warren County, outside of Warrington, right across the street from your church, Coral Springs Missionary Baptist Church. The sheer courage of women, children, and men. They would lay down in front of trucks loaded with tons of polychlorinated biphenyls, PCB, a very carcinogenic, very cancer-causing toxin. Warren County was a special place. It's still a special place. It's one of the most predominant black counties in North Carolina. One of the most rural counties. One of the most agricultural counties. The aquifer level in Warren County is very shallow. The last place you would dig a hole and dump polychlorinated biphenyls. The last place. So I don't know what was in the governor's mind or his advisors, but this is 1982. Some of you know I spent most of the 1970s in prison as a member of the Whittington 10. So the last thing I wanted to do, Congresswoman Clayton, was to get arrested again in North Carolina. But when I heard that members of my church, Oak Level United Church of Christ, Dollie was a member, Reverend Leon White, and our brother down there on the corner, the thing that caught my attention was blacks and whites were willing to go to jail to stop this location, to stop this dumping of toxic waste. Sister Clayton is right. It was not an isolated situation. Little did we know in 1982 that what happened in 1982 in Warren County was actually going on all across America. But nobody had called it out. The 1980s, Reagan is in the White House. The EPA was in denial. The same people that were denying environmental injustice are the same people that deny climate injustice, are the same people that deny the rights of women. Come on, Supreme Court. It's the same people that deny racism, that deny equal health to people. So that's what was at stake. I joined the 500 or so more people who got arrested. In fact, they didn't arrest me for laying in front of the truck. They arrested me for driving too slow. I probably got a historical note. I think I'm the only person in America that was jailed for driving too slow. But when I was in the Warren County Jail that night, I thought about what was going on. I come up in the Civil Rights Movement. You know, I'm from Oxford, North Carolina. I was born in 1948. In 1955, I still remember what happened to Emmett Till. It was down in Mississippi. But it wasn't an isolated incident. And so when I heard about what was going on in Warren County, I begged, I said, the United Church of Christ, I said, y'all get the bail money ready, because we got to go back to jail again. And they did. And I'm just so thankful and grateful that 40 years later, what started there in Warren County is now all over the world. It's a global environmental justice movement. Earlier today, I received messages in Portuguese from Brazil, where black women in Brazil are organizing around championing and challenging the disproportionate exposure to environmental hazards in Brazil. So it doesn't make any difference what language you speak, what race you are, what religion you are. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And we need clean water, clean air, and clean land. Because if you don't have clean water, clean air, and clean land, you're not going to have clean people. You're not going to have clean families. You're not going to have clean communities. Look what's going on right now. While we're here on the 40th anniversary of Warren County, our brothers and sisters in Jackson, Mississippi, can't drink water. In 2022, not 1982, 2022, environmental injustice persists. And so I'm pleased to be a part of this panel and looking forward to not only acknowledging what happened 40 years ago, but we should learn from it and build a broader multiracial, multicultural, multilingual, multigeographical movement called the environmental justice movement.
That's right. That's right. We're going to keep this momentum, and Leader Moseley, I'm going to turn it to you to answer the same question. Leader Labalme, and then Reverend Kearney.
I grew up in Warren County, and my mother was a resident there at the time of all of this. I guess, though, if I had to name one person that inspired me to get involved in all this, it was my cousin, James Gillen, who partnered with Mr. Clayton in 1961. And anyway, I was living and working in Raleigh at the time, and I drove up that morning to participate in the march. However, it was not my intention to get arrested that day. On the first day of the marches, we met at Coley Springs Baptist Church around 9 in the morning. It was a beautiful day. We were singing lyrics borrowed from the civil rights movement of the 60s. As we walked along, a helicopter hovered above us, I assumed to try to intimidate us. I was marching right behind Reverend Leon White, who was at the front of the line. And as we approached the site, we were met by about 75 or more highway patrol who were dressed in full riot gear with face shields and riot batons. And I began thinking, they didn't dress up like this for nothing. However, we marched on. The patrol commander read a statement ordering us to leave or that we would be arrested. Not skipping a beat, Reverend White gesticulated to the heavens, saying, "We get our orders from the man above." And that's when they began pushing us back with their sticks, and 66 of us chose to sit in the roadway to block the trucks and were arrested that first day. I was the first one that they put in that hot prison van. It felt like an oven. But I fought back to panic. We were then transported to the Warren County Jail. After filling the available jail cells, some of us were detained in the exercise yard, which was surrounded by a tall fence with concertina wire on top. By 3 o'clock, we had not been fed, and we were starving. Some of the ladies who had been standing across the street left and came back with fried chicken and biscuits. Denied access, the ladies sought the help of some of the young men standing nearby. We would then yell out, "Throw me a wing," or "Jump me a thigh." Over the fence, our food would go and into our waiting hands. Little did I realize that what we did in the fall of 1982 would eventually be recognized as an international movement, and I'm delighted to be here today, and I appreciate you having us.
Well, I just want to begin by saying how honored I am to be on this panel with this group of people. I was a student at Duke at the time, and my introduction to Warren County was through a dear friend of mine named Thaddeus Herrick, who wanted to go up and write a journalism piece for the Duke publication about the protests, and he needed someone to take pictures. And I was a self-taught photographer. I was a novice. I'd never covered a protest. My friend Thaddeus had never written a Deadline news story. Both of us went on to become journalists. And we arrived up there, and the memory that is so strong in my mind is being in Coley Springs Baptist Church and the power of the songs that people sang. And what's interesting is my contribution to Warren County is visual, but what I remember are the songs. Those really moved me to my core. And when everyone left the church, I got out my simple Pentax camera, whereas there were a lot of news photographers with multiple cameras and multiple lenses, and I had one camera with a generic telephoto lens, which I had to exchange, and started taking pictures of the marchers. And I was so moved by what I saw, the grit, the determination, the outrage, and the sense of injustice of a landfill that didn't even meet EPA standards at the time, being placed in a predominantly black community. And as Reverend Chavis said, it was very much a multiracial protest. So there were people of all ages, of all colors, walking 2 miles down to the landfill and laying in the streets.
Wow. Wow, my connection with the protest. It was in 1982 when I received my calling to ministry. Raised in Warren County, but I was a police officer in Washington, D.C. when the Lord intervened in my life and had me move back to North Carolina, to Henderson in 82. I wasn't in the protest, but I saw many of our church members and community members engaged in the protest, just everyday people. But actually, my connection with the protest started way back in 1874 when Kearney's bought property right there where the landfill was sited. So my grandfather and cousins have owned property in the area since 1874. We still got a lot of Kearneys along there, the road. If you look at the census, both sides of the road, all the way down from the church to the landfill like Kearneys. So my engagement really came when I returned to my church as associate minister and health ministry coordinator, and we were doing garden projects, and one of the kids asked, is the food we're growing safe because we're so close to the landfill? So this was back in 2011 when my research partner, I work for UNC, and I went after a $30,000 grant to begin conversation in our community congregation about how our community felt about the safety of the site. We didn't get the grant, but we used that momentum to develop the Warren County Environmental Action Team. And my intent is to capture all these untold stories of people who play significant roles in the protest. Maybe not on the front line. Maybe they cooked that chicken. Maybe he threw it across the fence. Because I find that if we don't document our history as African Americans, we get lost. So along the trail, I've done a manuscript and video on remembering Kearney Town. Because where the site was sited, we as blacks knew it as Kearney Town. So again, as we move forward into history, a lot of things that were significant to us prior to integration have been diminished or invisible. So I saw the power of writing and documenting our stories and putting our faces in the pictures. We already got a lot of pictures of people in our community who protested. And this year, with the 40th anniversary commemoration, we're intentionally trying to find the names of these people and get their stories. Because the bigger message to me is in every big movement, there are a lot of important places and people who are never recognized. So getting our people to see that we're all environmentalists, we all have a voice, and we have power. Warren County, to me, represents individuals finding their voice and then found a collective voice and stood up against a system that was so to be protecting us, a system that has been racist and treated us unfairly. I'm a Kearney. I come from the Kearney plantation in Warrington. So we have a history of racism that positioned Warren County to be a victim again. So we are hoping that we can change the narrative from being a victim to victors and be a part of this larger force for racial, environmental, social justice. So I'm just honored to be here. I never thought I'd be sitting here beside Congresswoman Clayton and Dr. Chavis and all the awesome panelists here. So to God be the glory. One plants, another water, but God gets the increase. Thank you.
That's right. So as we've heard just the pathway by which each of, again, these, I call them legends, and I hope y'all are okay with me saying that term. It's in truth.
Yes, it's true.
And that's right. And so the legend of their work, their faith, we've heard connectivity of family. Family that has been long historic in the community, but family that also led some of them into the pathway of protest. We've heard that the injustices ingrained in our bodies and on our backs as far as black people and brown people, we've heard an introduction, but we also heard that the environmental justice movement that was loud and the drum that was beat, it didn't start the injustice in Warren County, but it was elevated by which it has become a global beacon to help folks in indigenous communities to fight back against the injustices. So as we continue this thread of conversation and intentional, I've heard a little bit about there was intentionality, right? Intentionality in corporations and the targeting of the community, whether it was a former plantation area, whether there was racial injustices and segregation. So again, thanks to the sacrifices of these leaders of the Warren County Environmental Justice Protests of 1982, community organizers, allies, researchers, and black elected officials, we've come to understand that exposure to chemicals pollutants, and contamination can create illnesses or exacerbate those diseases we see in these same communities across North Carolina, as Dr. Chavis broke down so eloquently about the PCBs. As an outgrowth of the environmental justice movement, your individual and collective work in community and policy that shaped the environmental justice movement didn't end in 1982. And we want you to elaborate. So Dr. Chavis, I'll begin with you. In your service, you played an instrumental role in the first National People of Color Environmental Leaders Summit that birthed the principles of environmental justice movement that is actually still being used by President Biden today in enacting the Justice 40 initiative. And so describe your role in the development of the summit and the lasting importance of the summit on environmental justice today.
Thank you. From 1982 to 1991, for the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C., a lot happened. I really have to thank once again publicly the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice. Dr. Charles Earl Cobb was the first executive director. Reverend Leon White, who was not only the pastor of Oak Level United Church of Christ, he was also the director of the North Carolina, Virginia field office of the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice. Gave me my job with the UCC. And Reverend White is my pastor. Oak Level is my home church. But I want to go specifically, very succinctly. In 1982, we start pushing out the demand for environmental justice. We start giving more definition to the term environmental racism. I mentioned earlier that Ronald Reagan was president in the 1980s. And Congresswoman Clayton knows that we wound up in a situation where black people and other communities of color, we just couldn't make an allegation about discrimination. We had to prove it. And then they said, well, you have to show intent. So what we did was, I asked the United Church of Christ in 1986, Dollie was working with us, for $100,000 to do the first research study, data collection, on the correlation of the location of toxic waste and hazardous facilities, not just in North Carolina, but in all 50 states, in every zip code. It took us a year to do the study. And what we found out was no one had ever asked the question, is there a correlation between race and toxic waste? Obviously, after we did the study nationally, we found out that of thousands of zip codes in the United States, it is only where the zip code where you have predominantly black, predominantly Latino, predominantly Asian American and Pacific Islander, predominantly Native American, where you found disproportionately the targeting of these communities for these facilities. This is not a historical coincidence. This is deliberate targeting of people of color communities for these cancer-causing substances. Targeting. And so we issued this study, we published a study called Toxic Waste and Race in the United States in 1987. Then that led to the convening of the first People of Color Summit in 1991. And the reason why we had to have this summit, and be very honest with you, the established environmental movement had excluded people of color in decision making. There were no blacks up in the Sierra Club, the Audubon Society, the National Wildlife Federation, the National Resources Defense Council. Greenpeace was green, but it wasn't black. So we decided we needed to get not just black people, but we got all the communities that we knew were affected together. And it was a great 4-day summit. Dollar was there. And the reason why we had these 17 principles, because at the end of the summit, we stayed up all night long, Eva, drafting the 17 principles of environmental justice that to this day the EPA uses. To this day, the United Nations uses. To this day, the World Council of Churches uses. To this day, the National Council of Churches uses. So, but it all started in Warren County. And so that trajectory of work, because one of the things we found out in the movement for freedom, justice, and equality and equity, you just can't demand justice in one place and then allow an injustice to be in another place. You know, And that's why so many people were shocked about just what was going on in Jackson, Mississippi. There's a connection. And to all my people here who are concerned about climate justice, there's an intersection between climate justice and environmental justice. You know, the same pollutants, the same sources of the toxins come from the same place. But I just want to end on this point. I've come to this 40th acknowledgement, 40th year anniversary, 40th year recognition of the environmental justice movement out of Warren County. I'm optimistic. I'll tell you what, I'm optimistic. One, y'all are here.
That's right.
We're not alone in this movement. We've made tremendous progress. Now, President Clinton was the first president to issue an executive order on environmental justice. And then Obama did the same thing, President Obama. And then recently, the first thing that President Biden did, as soon as the inauguration, was sign an executive order on environmental justice. So, but when you have policy in place, you still got work to do. Because I'm concerned now that you got these, I'm going to use the right word, Lord have mercy.
Pray for 'em.
You got these backward,
Say so.
retarding state legislators who not only denying the right to vote in North Carolina, suppressing the right to vote in Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia and Florida and Texas and all across the country. We have to do something about this, you know, because my fear is, I just learned that they're getting ready to build a toxic waste facility in Sampson County.
Right.
Now, how did they get a permit? We got a Democratic governor. You know, what's going on in North Carolina? We can't allow a repeat of what happened in Warren County to now go over to Sampson County, another predominant black county. So we got work to do. We've made tremendous progress, but we got work to do. And I believe that this historical moment of looking back at what happened 40 years ago gives us an opportunity to rededicate ourselves, to renew our movement. Reverend, I believe in revivals. And Lord knows the environmental justice movement needs a revival.
That's right.
Amen.
And Dr. Chavis, correct me if I'm wrong in this moment before we go to our next question, was it also your leadership with the United Church of Christ that was able to provide the resources to even have the summit?
Yes.
All right, I just want to ground that for folks. So not only did you have to commission do the study with Mother Burwell, you then had to run the summit, and then you had to pay for the summit.
Well, look, it takes money.
That's right.
Now, we're here at Duke University, one of the most endowed universities in God's world. So we need to call upon Duke
Come
to
on.
use some of this endowment money
Come
to
on.
help the environmental justice movement in North Carolina and through the world.
That's right. That's right. So as we continue this discussion, and y'all may hear me in the choir box back here. Hear me say so. Just know that's me. Congresswoman Clayton, for more than half a century, you have dedicated your life of service to the people of North Carolina. You served as a county commissioner, a voting rights advocate, a member of Congress, and Assistant Secretary for the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, I believe, wasn't it? As an ambassador to the largest United Nations organization of the world. On the pathway to politics, Warren County and the protests have been mentioned in different media outlets as an inspiration in your decision to seek and hold public office, but I want to ask you directly, how did the environmental protests of Warren County influence your political pathway? Did you continue to work with leaders of the Warren County environmental justice movement following the protest as well? And please feel free to include Soul City in there. I just want to...
Well, I think as I said earlier, the enthusiasm and the activism and the concern of the people motivated not only me, but many people to become active in politics. We saw political activism as a way to take the reality that once the protest is over, you weren't going to get anything unless you went political. That's just the reality of it. The protest brought it to the attention. The protests mean that it wasn't inexpensive thing. You see, Warren County had the right zip code. And the right zip code to dump on us meant we were a small rural county, poor, with a majority black, right? So it had all the ingredients. And two, if we didn't, I think I worked for the governor who did it. But listen, if we were a big county, you would think about votes, right? So you begin to use the understanding that this had to be a political route. I want to just diverse just a moment. I actually wanted to be a doctor missionary. I thought I was smart enough to go to med school, thought I was going to seminary. Nothing happened. I married, all right? So I married Eva Clayton. That's it. That's her. And they ended up in Warren County. But part of that drive to want to make life better, the movement stimulated it, motivated that way. And I also, like Reverend Chavis, I believe that God has hand in our lives, you know. I was conveniently in Congress when you needed to have the money for EPA to detoxify, right? You had to have someone who was I think Clinton would have done it anyhow because, you know, Clinton was the first president to call for environmental justice. But to be able to stimulate and support that money coming to the state, to combine that with the money that Frank Balance was pushing in Congress to make sure the governor. So the political opportunity to connect with my county and to fulfill, I think, is a motivation for me that the environment is not injured, that we respect the creation of God in that area. So that was really the motivation I had. Let me just say this. I don't think I'm making news, but I will say this. They're just like environment justice, but just like democracy, just like our health. We have to check to see the status of it. We can't take a one-time act and think it's all over. Warren County commissioners monitored the PCB site and found that there was still, to this day, some toxicity there. So what we did back there is in danger now. And as a result of that, they call an emergency meeting today to announce it, I think, to the public. But they call an emergency meeting of making sure the state was involved, making sure the federal government was involved, and Reverend Kearney to let him know what was happening. So we can't think what we did in 1982 or further along when we got the money to detoxify, that we're through in that. And so, you know, we brush off what we do for poor folks. We haven't done that for them, right? I've committed my life for hunger and food insecurity. Oh, we gave them food stamps, right? Rather we give them nutritious food or not. So the environment justice requires us to be monitoring that in all the communities, not only where there are toxic waste. We ought to be concerned about creating the products that have the waste. We ought to be concerned about the fusion that we use energy that pollutes our air. The moral commitment is to invest in those activities that are most sustainable, that you don't have to correct something, right? That we in North Carolina have seen these ads now say, if you live near Camp Lejeune, right, and breathe that poison air, you now can get some money, right? That's right. Well, money can't replace if you have cancer, right? So the first thing is as we environment justice should be what we do initially in producing things. We need to take the time to make sure what we are doing is not having the wrong impact that we have to correct.
And I hope everyone heard that charge and that call to action, that the environmental justice movement is not done, and even specifically directly in Warren County,
Yes.
it is not done. And so I hope that everyone felt that charge as it was laid here today. So next as we move, because I want to make sure that we have time to hear comments, and then we may have to cut off some time for Q&A. I hope I can create some space for folks to ask questions. We're doing great, good. So, Mother Burwell, you served in so many roles, and I feel like I need to be able to talk about you as a liaison. You was working with, Congresswoman Eva Clayton here, Congressional Member G.K. Butterfield, so much. But you served as chair of the Joint Warren County and State PCB Landfill Working Group following the Afton protest in Warren County. What were the objectives of the working group, and what did it achieve on behalf of the people of Warren County?
Well, let me just say that there were several objectives of the working group. First, you know that because of the pressure of 500 people going to jail and the pressure that the movement put on Congresswoman Clayton's ex-boss, Jim Hunt, he one day called and said that it was outside agitators that was creating all this problem in Warren County. So I decided that I would have outside agitator day. And we called as many outside agitators as we could to come to Warrenton and go to jail and be arrested with us. And I also told them, you know, my mother said that the most valuable piece of the washing machine was the agitator. Because without the agitator, your clothes didn't get clean. So I became proud of all our agitators that came to Warren County. And because of all those agitators that came to Warren County and went to jail with us, the next day the governor held a press conference and said, when technology becomes feasible, we're going to clean up the landfill. Well, he never thought that technology would become feasible and he would be governor again. But so our goal was to hold him to account for that promise that he had made. And there was so in I think it was 2002, when we discovered that there was water in the landfill. Now, no, let me delete it a minute. That in 1978, when the PCBs were spilled along the roadside, our community was saying, take this PCB to ML, Alabama. But because of what those 17 principles, one of which that no landfill should be in another community. Excuse me a minute, I thought I had turned it off. So once we figured that out, and when the water was in the landfill, we decided that rather than the state was saying we're going to pump the water out of the landfill and take it to another community, we decided that no, we were not going to let that water be pumped out of that site and taken to another black and poor, predominantly people of color community. So we stayed to the state. We went to jail 500 strong in 82. We built a movement now, so it'll be 5,000. So they gave the money to clean up the landfill. And the final point we wanted to make was that we wanted the whole estate to not having us come to Raleigh for meetings. We want them to, so every meeting was held in Warren County. And if it was a really tight meeting, we had a prayer before the meeting, and that made them really uncomfortable. And finally, we wanted to educate and convince communities that you could work with government. That we worked hard to get Eva Clayton elected to Congress. and we knew that when she was in Congress, we could work with her. But it was so many communities that really just didn't trust government. And so we wanted to put ourselves in a position where we could show other communities that you could work with government as long as there were a mutual partnership and mutual respect. And so when it was all said and done, and my daughter was at UNC Chapel Hill, and they start talking about all these environmental policies that had created, that had been created because of what happened in Warren County. We all knew that we had made a difference, and so the policy around the first environmental justice office that was established as a result of Warren County that was all because we knew that we had made a difference in policy that affected our community.
Excellent. And, yes. And this is the next question, Brother Burwell. Correct me if I'm wrong, it was over $20 million, correct, that you all secured
Right.
from the state
Right.
in that cleanup. So I
Right.
want
A combination.
combination. Okay, so I wanted that
From
amount for
state
folks.
and EPA.
And state and EPA. Okay, so I wanted to ground that amount. It wasn't a novel amount.
Right.
And it was, granted, was it in 2004?
In 2004, they were founded.
And just want to understand, 1982
Mhm.
was the birth of the movement
Right.
and the fight and unification in that working group. And the recognition of that money didn't happen until 2004. Okay, thank you for your service and your labor. And as we move, Elder Moseley, you endured arrest and confinement following your participation in the nonviolent civil disobedience protests of Warren County. In history, we are familiar with nonviolent civil disobedience used as a strategy in the fight for civil and human rights, as we saw during the civil rights movement. But it was groundbreaking to see this strategy used again in the fight for environment and corporate targeting of a predominantly African American community. So in your opinion, Leader Moseley, how was the use of nonviolent civil disobedience effective in the fight against environmental contamination?
It was very effective. We practiced the same nonviolent civil disobedience that Dr. King advocated in the 60s to elevate the consciousness of the public and to gain their support. We knew we had to be newsworthy and nonviolent. Our marching and arrests provided plenty of content for the media to use. At first, when a patrolman told us we were being arrested, we stood up and went with them to the prison bus. However, in order to tie up more patrolmen, what we did was go limp. And that provided us to tie up more patrolmen, as some of us were a little bit overweight, and it took more than two to carry us to the bus. But we marched almost every day for 6 weeks, totaling over 500 arrests. We were simply ordinary people achieving extraordinary things.
I hope everyone was able to gather some tactics and strategy, just in case we need to do another nonviolent civil disobedience. So, Leader Labalme, you were there and captured history in what is now considered as the most iconic photos of the environmental justice movement that we still circulate today globally. Looking through the lens of your own work, how important is the role of journalism and media in movement building?
Well, I think, as many of you know, journalism is the first draft of history. And that includes the printed journalism word as well as photographs. And so I think all of us can think of a photo being very powerful and evocative and bringing your emotions to the surface that you may have seen in the news or now on social media and TV. And so I was 22 years old at the time when I took those photos, and those photos were powerful then. And I've spent a lot of time in the last year looking at those photos again, and they are still extremely powerful now to me at 62 years old. They bring me right back to Warren County. And I think in terms of the role of the media, it's so important that someone be there to record these events and to document them. And in many ways, this panel is important because it's helping us remember what happened 40 years ago. So I'm very grateful to Duke and Cameron and the organizers of this panel to allow all of us some time up here to talk about this stuff. Reverend Chavis mentioned something earlier about how a lot of women, Dollie, who's on the cover of a small booklet I produced, and I'll talk briefly about that in a bit, but I was an inexperienced photojournalist, and I was not always up at the front of the line where Reverend Chavis was. I was often in the middle of the protest, so I came back with different photos, and I ended up using, I was taking a documentary photography class at Duke at the time. I didn't have a topic, and when I went up there for the first time, I said, oh my gosh, I have got to photograph this. I knew it was incredibly important. I had no idea 40 years later we would be where we are now. So I continued to go up to Warren County when other daily journalists had to go off and do other assignments. And there were times when I was up there when I was the only photographer. And so my images are different from those of your typical newspaper photographer who has to parachute in for one assignment and then go photograph several others that same day. So in that respect, I was very lucky. And in terms of preserving the memory, it's so important that things are written about, videotaped now, put on social media. So at the time, there was no social media, there was no internet. And several years after the protests, I was getting ready to move on to another job, and I thought, I've got to do something before I leave. I wanted to create a record and leave it to the citizens of Warren County and dear people like Dollie. And so I received a small amount of money, and it was a shoestring budget. Everybody volunteered, and I produced this small 28-page booklet in 1987. And I donated a lot of copies to the church. I gave some to Dollie, I gave some to Reverend Leon White, and then I went on with my journalism career, and here I am. It's come full circle. So. And I just want to say to the students in the room, the impact that a Duke alumni, a Duke student made with photography, not being at the front of the line, but being in the number as an ally supporting the world-resounding impact from being there as a student. We have to give credit because there are student leaders in here now that will make the exact same impact, whether before this conversation or after, that will resonate, and I just want to ground that. So thank you, Leader Labalme. So, last question to Reverend Kearney, and then we're going to open it with Q&A, and I'll start with a question and Q&A that has already been posed. But Reverend Kearney, before we go to that, faith leaders were instrumental in organizing and supporting the movement. As a native of Warren County, the current chair of the Warren County Environmental Action Team, currently organizing in community, and is, of course, the lead associate minister of the historic Holy Springs Missionary Baptist Church, what do you believe is the role of the church and faith community in the movement for human rights and environmental justice?
Wow. As you know, historically, the African American church has always been a safe space, a hub of our community. And I think as black people, we've always struggled for the social justice. And the event that happened in 1982 sort of put environmental justice right in our face. And so the two merged. And I think that the church needed to be the moral voice for justice, for all types of justice. Also, the church, I find, has to show our congregants how to walk out their faith in a practical way. After you pray, what do you do? I believe that some churches were birthed with this passive concept. We need to be passive and pray and God will change it. But here comes the protest in '82, and they realize that after you pray, you got to get up and do something. Now, you might do one thing, I might do another, but the church has to help people learn to walk out their faith in a practical way. Find their space in the movement. We all own this movement. It also has to give us the comfort to realize environmentalism environmentalism isn't a white thing, because God put Adam and Eve in the garden even before sin to take care of his creation. So we're all environmentalists. We're all responsible. So I believe that our teaching should be to empower our people to realize their voice is important, their testimony is important, their story is important, and there's a place in this movement that actually is faith. It's faith. You're going forward in faith with a conscience of just, and believing that God is a God of justice. He's a just God. Thank God he don't give us everything we deserve, but anyway, that's his grace. So the church, again, is an important place in our community, a place that's trusted and comfortable to people, and the message should be that we all need to be engaged. We need to be the voice for the voiceless, and step out and intercede and work for justice for everyone. Moral clarity.
Excellent. I really want to say you put into practice being stewards of the earth. The fact that you heeded the call to come back and tell us that it was called, what was it again, Kearney Town?
Kearney Town.
Kearney Town, come on now.
And my calling, I had a vision, and the vision was that my work built on the shoulder of all of these people, and I was to help carry the ball across the goal line.
Have mercy. And think about the legacy of what you said, being a plantation area.
Right.
The legacy of pain, and you've come back, and there's always a quote that resonates with me, and I can't recall who said it, but they buried us, but they didn't know we were seeds. And to see you come back around and say, as a steward and the chair of the environmental action team, the legacy of your people, I'm sorry, it gave me chills.
Important piece that I forgot is the forgiveness. How do you go through this and not hold malice within your heart? What man meant for harm, God can turn around for your good.
That's
so
right.
How we move our people through these traumatic situations in a way that does not cancer bitterness in their spirit, that we might hear God's voice for unity.
Now I think that's the word that closes out this panel as we go into Q&A. And just first, I just want a deep appreciation, and we're about to go into Q&A, so we're not leaving just yet, but not yet. But there's just deep appreciation for you all being willing to share the story of what you all had, because it wasn't easy. And sometimes it can be glamorized, the struggle once it's over, but it's called a struggle for a reason, because it's a struggle in that struggle. That's the actual name, the activation. And so you all sharing not only the story and the victories by which you've had to create through blood, sweat, and tears, you're also sharing to us the trauma by which you've had to unpack alone. When you go home to family, when other folks don't see you, when the cameras are turned off, you are still sharing these stories for us to understand models of resiliency to do the exact same thing and survive. And so I just want to honor that and honor y'all, because I'm from North Carolina, I'm Afro-Indigenous. And y'all understand, my mama, when I was 7 years old, she said she was going to go protest against an environmental corporation. This was in the 90s in the West. And because she did that, I said, that's what I'm going to do, because I followed my mama. And I honor her, and she said, you always look at your elders. And each of you are the reason I pattern the pathway of my heart's work and my purpose because of this. So this is not just me saying this as a moderator. This is me saying it because it's purpose and alignment, and I appreciate you all for pouring into people and children y'all had no idea that you invested in many, many years ago. Yes.
Right there. Debbie, again. Recognize you.
I want to also recognize one of the things that the task force, the working group said, we had to have a science advisor that answered to us. That science advisor was Patrick Barnes, that had his own company in Florida, that I met at the People of Color Summit, and he's here today.
If you were a part of, supported, and in community with these great folks in the birthing and then the outgrowth, can you please either stand up or an accessibility practice, equity, raise your hand, just so we can just appreciation, honor. I heard I see a couple folks in the audience. All right. You see hands raised that not only are you speaking to the panel on this if they give consent, but also to the folks who have raised their hand, because some of these folks were moved and birthed into the movement and were some of the very children laying in front of vehicles. Okay? So Q&A time, y'all. All right, so the first question, and then we'll have time hopefully to take 2 questions. And what I'll do is if Raise your hand, and again, accessibility and equity practice. If you can, please stand with us if you so shall choose. And if you need, and we'll pass the microphone as we can. I want to be cognizant of folks still wearing masks. But then if you choose to sit down, that's okay, but I will recognize by hands. So the first question, and this is open to the panel, whoever again feels so led to answer first. What similarities are we unfortunately witnessing 40 years later in 2022? And any important facts around the midterm elections as well would be helpful. Any recommendations? But what? Whoever would like to go first. Sure. What similarities are we unfortunately witnessing 40 years later in 2022? And some of you already touched on that. You know, Congresswoman Clayton, you already said, guess what, PCB is still there. So what are some similarities that we can expand on for the audience that we are still witnessing 40 years later?
I would say Jackson, Mississippi is one. And, you know, racism still exists. And where the similarities, again, is that racism still exists. And it's going to, you may win a battle, and I really consider Warren County as winning a battle, but the war still rages, and we got to continue to fight. That's right.
Well, I want to say that I think Jackson is right. I think Jackson, Mississippi is right, but I also think that the similarity in the cautiousness is that we wait till a Jackson, Mississippi occur. What I'm challenging us to say, we ought to be preventive as well as correcting, right?
Right.
So our water systems need to be challenged.
Right.
Our air needs to be seen. We need to see what kind of energy we have. So our challenge today is, what do we invest in? What laws do we prevent? How do we have sustainable agriculture? And I'm a pro-hunger and food insecurity advocate. How do we produce food sustainably? So I think the challenge for us is not only where they are already dumping or polluting our waters, but the challenge is, how do we, as responsible citizens, help to prevent that?
Right.
How do what do we buy we throw away? We also are part of that problem, folks. Not just our governments, but we can be involved in our governments, make sure they're sensitive to policies that invest in good government, invest in a healthy environment.
That's right. That's right. And so, as I take any questions, first hand right here, and then, let's start here. Yep, let's actually, and what I'll do is practice. If you could pass me a mic, There you go. Thank you. Yes.
Good afternoon. Angela Dunstan, a product of Warren County and a product of all of these great folks who taught me what activism and being an advocate has been. Publicly, I want to say thank you, especially to Mother Dollie and Mother Eva, who knew my mother before I knew my mother, so I appreciate that. But my question to all of you is similar to what you just said, L.A. As we're looking at some of the injustices that we thought that we had resolved 40 years ago, that are now back on the surface, what do we do to change the dynamic and hopefully address these issues, as you said, Congresswoman Clayton, before they become a challenge, before the Jackson, Mississippi becomes to the point where we can't drink the water? What do we do now as a preventive measure? And more specifically, how do we help these students at Duke, who are our leaders of today, to be the kind of activists and advocates and agitators that you were, and in some cases, I know you, Congresswoman Clayton, still are?
Well, I'm waiting for my alma mater to invite me back so I can be a teacher and professor here at Duke University to raise up another generation of freedom fighters for environmental justice, for climate justice, because we have to institutionalize the struggle. The struggle doesn't fall out of the sky. It doesn't happen by osmosis. We have to, with intention. Let me say this. I don't think anybody is born a racist. Let me say that again. You don't come into this world with racial hatred. as part of the socialization and miseducation that goes on in our nation. So we got a lot of work to do. And it's intergenerational. You see these young people shooting up these schools. There's something going on wrong. But it's just not to point the fingers at the young people. Where did they get that notion from? Where does racial prejudice come from? Where does racial hatred come from? So we got some work to do. And to me, I'm encouraged, because to me the difference between 1982 and 2022 is that we got more people that want to be in the movement today than 40 years ago. That's encouraging. You know, there were a few people out, you know, just think, 500 people went to jail to save millions of people around the world now. And one of the things we learned in COVID, we're still in COVID, that's why some of us still have masks on. It's a global pandemic. Under the Trump administration, the first thing he did was got the United States out of the World Health Organization. And then the second thing he did, he quit the climate treaty in Paris about the environment. Total denial. And so you see this stuff happen on January the 6th, that's an indication that we got some real homework to do here in America, in our communities, and across North Carolina. I don't accept the fact that my home state is a red state, is a mega state. There's something wrong with that. But we have to change it. So, you know, movement people tend to just talk to movement people. But we got to, Dollie, reach out and raise up that new generation of freedom fighters. And I'm encouraged, you know, I'm going to speak more about it tomorrow at Duke Chapel. But I think that there's an indication, you know, I mean, I was in Raleigh last week. Across this state, I see more and more people of goodwill willing to work together like they've never worked together before. And to me, that's a source of encouragement.
Yeah, that's right. Cameron, are we?
We have 3 minutes left.
3 minutes left. Okay, so we have room for one more question, and we're going to pack that in 3 minutes and a good hearty welcome. So do I have a yes? And please introduce yourself, the same as Leader Dunstan did. It was a great model.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shorna Allred, and I'm here visiting from Cornell University at UNC Chapel Hill for the year. Sorry, because I know I'm in a Duke, the other college on the hill. But I'm just so grateful for all that each and every one of you have done as an environmental justice scholar. I've been so inspired by the work that you've done, and it has done so much to inspire the next generation of students. So I just want to first thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything that you've all done and continue to do. And my question is about policy. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the future of environmental justice policy with Environmental Justice 40, with EPA Administrator Michael Regan, and some of the changes. Do you see policy being more proactive versus reactive, which is what has been the case for so many decades and decades? So I was curious about what you see on the forefront of policy with the Biden administration and our current Congress. Thank you.
That's a good question.
Congresswoman Clayton? Yep, that's right.
I think you're right that we have had more of a reactive, and I think that still persists. But I am encouraged that there is more of a proactive, and I want to give a shout out to the Biden administration in the recent bill called the Inflation Reduction Act. If you read that, there's considerable new resources for not only environment but for new energy. So it is trying to motivate both corporate and individuals to make that decision. So that's a more proactive thing. But you who are here, you can cause that to be a more proactive by making sure in November, come elect those people who you think are right, have the right policy. As much as we can talk and protest, at the end of the day, it's those who have the pen to write the policy. And you can make that decision. We still have a democracy. And that democracy depends on individuals being responsible citizens and your voice, please raise your voice to make, and I think we do have good leadership now at the environmental department, and I think I'm very proud of that, but he needs our support, and the support is that we demand and expect great things from him.
Thank you.
I hope that everyone can join me in standing to give a round of applause to these legends, history makers,